This is Omar Nashashibi in Washington, D.C. with news on increased tensions between the U.S. and Canada. In this video, we are addressing both a tax and a trade dispute between the two neighbors related to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, base erosion and profit-shifting tax agreements with Pillars 1 and 2. Canada recently restated that its digital services tax will take effect on January 1, 2024 if the countries party to the OECD tax talks do not reach a deal on the two-pillar tax framework. This in turn could lead the U.S. to respond with tariffs on Canadian products and other action taken under U.S. domestic laws. Digital services taxes on multinationals are a mix of gross receipts taxes and transaction taxes that apply on everything from digital advertising, operation of online marketplaces, internet purchases, and the sale of data collected from users, among other transactions depending on the country. As part of the OECD talks, most countries agreed to eliminate their digital service taxes due to redundancy. As of June 2023, 143 countries signed on to the OECD Domestic Tax Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Agreement, known as BEPS. The OECD agreement calls for two pillars. Pillar 1 applies to the biggest and most profitable multinationals and reallocates part of their profit to the countries where they sell their products and provide their services, or simply put, where their consumers are. Under Pillar 2, multinationals with over 700 million euros of annual revenue, or roughly $800 million in today's money, would be required to pay a minimum tax of 15% on income arising in each jurisdiction in which it operates. This is according to the OECD guidebook that we just went through. The OECD estimates that Pillar 1 could reallocate the taxing rights on roughly $200 billion of profit to jurisdictions each year. The Pillar 2 global minimum tax of 15% is estimated to generate around $150 billion in additional global tax revenues annually. Congressional Republicans continue to raise objections to the agreement, saying it cedes U.S. authority over taxes to other countries. In September, Republicans on the House Ways and Means Tax Writing Committee denounced the OECD's tax negotiations, saying the committee would not cede its authority to shape U.S. tax law. These are just some of the obstacles in the way of that global minimum tax and the BEPS agreement. As part of these agreements, though, many countries agreed to eliminate the types of digital services taxes I mentioned earlier that Canada is considering implementing. And under an agreement reached over the summer, most OECD countries agreed to extend a moratorium on digital services taxes through the end of 2024, essentially waiting until after the U.S. elections. Not Canada, and this brings us to the issue that impacts manufacturers and distributors of all sizes. Canada has said that it will move forward with the digital services tax, which the U.S. officials say clearly targets American companies retroactively to 2022. This is where the U.S. Congress comes in. The top Republican and Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee, which covers taxes and trade, sent a letter to the Biden administration calling on them to, quote, apply the requisite response immediately if and when Canada may adopt a proposed digital services tax. In September, nearly all members, a bipartisan group of the members of the Ways and Means Committee, which also handles tax and trade, demanded that the administration take action to ensure that Canada does not implement the tax, meaning take preemptive action before the end of the year. Many here in Washington, including in the Biden administration, believe that Canada's tax would warrant action under the new NAFTA, the USMCA. The USMCA does include a dispute mechanism that could be an avenue, but members of Congress could call for some type of retaliatory action in the form of tariffs or taxes that could affect cross-border trade. This is one of those tax and trade issues that is colliding with a lot of politics and creating uneasiness both on Capitol Hill and in the business community. In February of 2022, and even as far back as December 2021, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative said that Canada's tax could result in Section 301 tariffs on imports from Canada. This Section 301 tariff is the same law used to impose tariffs on Chinese imports that are still in place now roughly 5 years since first being imposed. It would not surprise anyone to see a tariff list that targets politics of products that are political importance to Canada and also seeking to protect some that are political importance to here in the U.S. ahead of the 2024 elections. There's definitely pressure from Congress as we approach the January 1st deadline for when Canada said it would impose the tax retroactive to 2022. Although implementation of some of the base erosion and profit shifting agreement items can be done through regulation, others would require legislation or some kind of a treaty amendments, which then must be approved by the U.S. Senate, if not both chambers of the U.S. Congress, if it would be legislation. And for the main foundations of BEPS, we are hearing that there seems little to no chance that the U.S. Congress will move on Pillars 1 and 2 prior to the end of the year, let alone before next November's elections. And that is the holdup on the OECD agreement. What happens with the U.S. elections in November 2024 really impacts a lot of that outcome. Meanwhile, the Canadians are not willing to wait that long. on their digital services tax slated to take effect here on January 1st in just under 3 months. And if that happens, the U.S. will likely retaliate, which puts manufacturers and distributors on both sides of the border in the middle of a simmering trade battle that could really escalate quite quickly starting on January of the coming year. While not grabbing many of the headlines outside of Washington, D.C. in trade circles here in town, this is quickly moving up the ladder of concern that could cause disruption on one side or both sides if they do move forward with this. As always, this is something that we're going to continue watching closely here in Washington. They really don't have a lot of time to de-escalate, especially if the Canadians are continuing with their push towards that January 1st deadline, and the U.S. does not back off. Potentially even imposing some kind of a 301 tariff could cause some serious disruption, especially heading into a lot of uncertainties in 2024. As always, we'll keep you posted on developments here in Washington. In the interim, please reach out for any questions or further information.